Welcome, everybody, to a special live edition of the Tailgate. Special because the Giants have a new head coach. They've named Bills offensive coordinator Brian Daboll, the favorite in the clubhouse, the favorite all along. It ends up getting the job just like everybody expected. We're going to break that down here for you for the next little bit. I'm Ralph Vacchiano. I'm joined by The Ringer and Spotify's Danny Heifetz. We'll be joined in a little while by John Jastrzemski of SNY and also of The Ringer and Spotify. And Danny, we're ready for this. We're prepared because we've pretty much known, I think, for a couple of weeks that this was going to be Brian Daboll. No surprise, and I think he's the right guy. How about you?
I think this is fantastic news. To your point about the tea leaf reading, I mean, I don't think as a fan of New York sports, there has been an easier and more obvious kind of path to seeing someone get hired. But at the same time, this is the best case scenario. And I actually think this is not like a take. I think this is the best case outcome for the Giants 2021 season. This is like a holiday people should be celebrating. This is perfect. Like realistically, the Giants just endured 3 or 4 months of embarrassment and rock bottom for a reset. This is the first organizational reset the team's had in 40 years. That to me is a lot better than the team going 8-9 and then convincing themselves they were on the right path with the Gettleman, Joe Judge, Daniel Jones era. This is a far better outcome. It's kind of like, they used to leave a field lie fallow for a year and then it would become fertile again. That's the New York Giants. This is a holiday.
It is kind of interesting. And by the way, the Giants have now officially announced it, so we can forget saying it's from sources, and they're working on it. He is officially now the new head coach of the New York Giants. And covering this search, even from the GM search, has been so different because, we know they never look outside of the family for the GM. It was always they're looking at their assistant GM or somebody to promote from within. Here they go with 9 candidates, all from the outside. And they go to the coaching search. And again, it's not familiar names, they don't even go, they went with guys who were, thought of as good head coach material, not guys like Joe Judge, who was kind of pulled out of nowhere, not a guy like Ben McAdoo, who had just a year or so as an offensive coordinator, not a, they did have one in there, but not really a retread like Pat Shurmur, who had a poor experience in Cleveland. It was fresh, young faces. Even Brian Flores he's still 40 years old. He was a finalist for the job, but they really took a whole new approach to finding their next regime.
Yeah, you said the word new approach. I mean, I think that for Giants fans, I think a turning point was actually when Michael Strahan went on Fox. I think Strahan's as beloved as there is as a 21st century Giant. And when Strahan said, I think it was very diplomatic of him being firm, but staying it, as you said, outside the family with the search, keeping things inside the family. Strahan said they needed to modernize how they went about like their hiring processes. And what that meant was, as you said, interviewing people who don't work for your company. That's how the world works now. And that's what the Giants weren't doing like before my time, but a little history lesson for people kind of tuning in now. I mean, the last time the Giants went outside the organization, I like what you said, outside the family for a GM was 1979. The NFL stepped in and forced them to hire someone. They picked George Young. George Young led to Parcells, the second great era of Giants football with everything that came with the Super Bowls. But it's been 40 years. 40 years. That's how long Moses wandered the desert until the Giants actually went and hired outside again. And every 4 decades, you need a reset on organizations. So now you've got Shane running the team as a GM. And now Shane goes and brings someone in from Buffalo, Brian Daboll, who he worked with, and he's known for a long time. This is fantastic news because you can't just keep hiring from within when obviously within is not working. They've had 100 losses in the last 10 years. That's when you go outside.
Boy, and if they're going to poach a couple of people for an organization, and I can't believe I'm saying this because for years I would not have said the Buffalo Bills, but the Buffalo Bills right now are a model organization. They had gone 17 years without making the playoffs before they brought in Brandon Beane as their GM, who brought in Joe Shane as the assistant, who helped bring in Brian Daboll as the offensive coordinator under Sean McDermott. So they're taking from an organization that turned things around and really was in as dire straits as the Giants were. So they certainly have an idea of how to scrape off the bottom and put things back together again.
Oh my God. I mean, look, if you're just tuning in and you look, there's a lot going on. If you're just kind of figuring out who's Brian Daboll, Bills offensive coordinator. This is the guy who made Josh Allen. This is someone who is a laughing stock. Josh Allen was just 2 years ago. And including me, I was wrong about Josh Allen. I looked at Josh Allen and was like, this is, I get he has the skill set, but he has no processing. Brian Daboll, through his relentless work with Josh Allen and Josh Allen's own drive, obviously Allen gets most of the credit, but I mean, Josh Allen had in the history of the NFL, the single largest improvement in completion percentage over a 2-year period ever in history. He did that. He was Rob Gronkowski's tight end coach in New England. He's worked for Bill Belichick. He's won Super Bowls for Bill Belichick, went to Nick Saban for 1 year as offensive coordinator, won a championship for Nick Saban. I mean, this is a guy with credentials, but again, the quarterback work with Josh Allen is really what you need in today's game. You need to be able to develop a young quarterback while they're on a rookie contract. You need to know if they're good, which right now the problem with Daniel Jones, is he good? Well, you need to know before you give him a second contract. This is everything you want. And most importantly, in tandem, someone who can work with the GM and a GM, a head coach, being in lockstep, making organizational decisions. I mean, that's what the San Francisco 49ers have, and they might go to the Super Bowl in a couple of weeks. So this is really a modern way to run the team. And again, that's not how they were doing it. And I'm thrilled that now they are running it in a modern way.
Yeah, the work that he did with Josh Allen is fascinating, especially when people think that maybe he can do the same to Daniel Jones. And, look, Daniel Jones is probably not Josh Allen. I think it's safe to say that. We've seen enough of Daniel Jones to know that. But Josh Allen was not the Josh Allen we know when he came out of college. It was not a guarantee that he was going to become this kind of superstar. He was known as an erratic but strong-armed quarterback in Wyoming, not playing in the SEC. There were a lot of doubters as to whether he could become a viable NFL quarterback. And you look back to that draft, the fact that he went after Sam Darnold and Baker Mayfield, that's not a surprise. Some people had him after Josh Rosen. I can't remember the exact order. He was, fourth, fifth on some list. There were some guys that loved him. Pat Shurmur famously, thought he was the guy to draft for the Giants. But, the Giants obviously made a mistake taking Saquon Barkley over Josh Allen. But it wasn't a slam dunk at that point with Josh Allen. The key to him, he had the ability, but someone had to harness it. And if you think Daniel Jones has the ability, they are now putting him in the right hands.
I completely agree. And I want to give some really important context to what you just said. I think the Josh Allen thing, it's really easy to look at. How'd you take Saquon over Josh Allen? How'd the Jets take Sam Darnold over Josh Allen? I think it's kind of like how Steph Curry could have gone to the Knicks. And on the surface, it's like, oh my God, the Knicks could have had Steph. Let me tell you something. The Warriors retaught Steph Curry how to walk so his ankles wouldn't keep bothering him. Like, the Knicks were not going to reteach Steph Curry how to walk to keep him healthy. Steph Curry wouldn't be Steph Curry, like the Steph Curry you want if he became a Knick. Josh Allen would not have became Josh Allen if he went to the Giants or the Jets. He went to the perfect spot in Buffalo. And that's why Brian Daboll is coming to the Giants, because Brian Daboll, the stability that Buffalo had in head coach, GM, front office, head coaching, like at a certain point, football really is, strip the football away, strip the plays, strip the X's and O's. Football's a sport where you need to hire a lot and then organize the people you hire. Like, forget the sport. You need an organization where the hiring department is in tandem with the actual management. And like, it's kind of wild when you think you're going to be hiring. I mean, how much turnover is there in a football roster every year? You're talking about half, sometimes 3/4 over a 2 or 3 year process. The hiring department needs to be in lockstep, and like having that and pulling that from Buffalo, an organization that again went from laughing stock 4 years ago to, even though they went in the divisional round, looked like what maybe still might be the best team in the NFL. So I'm just absolutely thrilled that they were able to pull that.
All right, we're going to make room now for John Jastrzemski. He joins us, our SNY contributor, and of course with the Ringer and Spotify. John, everybody seems pretty excited by the fact that Brian Daboll is the new head coach of the Giants. It was pretty obvious, I think, all along. They make a good choice?
Slam dunk choice as far as I'm concerned, Ralph Vacchiano. I love it because you now have everybody working together. There are no conflicts of interest necessarily right out of the gate, knowing how well Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll know each other from their time with the Buffalo Bills, right? They worked together in Buffalo. They saw that organization from the ground up have a ton of success. And for me, Ralph, what I love so much about this, Brian Daboll has put the time in. He has been a coordinator a bunch of different places. He's not just worked for Bill Belichick. He worked for Nick Saban. He goes and works for Sean McDermott. And I think he's ready to be a head coach. I think he is the perfect guy to usher in 21st century offensive football to the New York Giants. And I think they got it right. Whether or not these guys are going to be Super Bowl champions or they're going to restore the Giants to greatness remains to be seen. But I give ownership credit because they got two particular people, Shane Daboll from a really good organization, and I think it's a good place to build it back up here if you're the Giants.
Joe Schoen, by the way, in a statement says, I have observed firsthand Brian's strengths as a leader. He's an excellent communicator, intelligent, innovative, and hardworking. He's genuine, and he has a genuine and engaging personality, which is refreshing, and he fosters relationships with the players and coaches around him. He is progressive in his vision and values. Collaboration, the collaboration is the big word that the Giants keep dropping on us, on alignment. And, really, it's never been a big story around the Giants, but especially those of us who have been around the team and covered them, we knew there was some tension, especially towards the end with Dave Gettleman and Joe Judge, just like there was at the end with Gettleman and Pat Shurmur, just as like there was at the end with Jerry Reese and some of the coaching staff. It has just been a sort of theme probably over the most of the last decade for the Giants, the idea that Schoen and Daboll have worked together for so long and they have to know what each likes in players and what they can do with players. That's going to be big when they go to the draft or when they start looking at whatever they need to do to start fixing this team. And Danny, you saw up in Buffalo, they were never shy up in Buffalo about making big moves. They were great in the draft with mid-round guys. We see Gabriel Davis and Dawson Knox and Devin Singletary, but they traded up twice in the draft to get Josh Allen. They made a huge trade for Stephon Diggs. So they're open to creative ways to get players if they can identify ones they want.
If we're being honest, the Giants were kind of doing like Bills cosplay the last few years. I mean, they went and got Kenny Golladay for Daniel Jones, like the Bills got Stephon Diggs for Josh Allen without understanding the why behind what Buffalo did. Buffalo had a really sound process to go get Stephon Diggs. The Giants were just kind of like swinging for the fences because, well, whatever, like we need to see if Jones is good. I think that at the end of the day, again, you can strip the football out of it. The GM is in charge of the inputs and the head coach is in charge of the outputs. You need those two people to be aligned. There's a reason the Niners might go to the Super Bowl for the second time in 3 years. And it is wonderful news that the Giants are aligning the inputs and the outputs. And I will give, as JJ said, credit to ownership because I have been very, very hard on the Mara family for being perhaps a little too involved in this process. I think that if the Maras were making the calls, someone else might have been hired. I think it doesn't take much to say 2 and 2 is 4. Joe Schoen worked in Buffalo with Daboll. Daboll's head coach. This was Shane's call. I am very heartened that ownership seems to have given this call to Joe Schoen to make this decision.
One note, fellas, if you go back to Joe Schoen's comments a couple of days ago, he mentioned this idea of building a complete staff across the board. I do wonder if that was a major strike against Brian Flores when you think about his offensive staffs in Miami. And I know there was some around the Giants who maybe wanted an experienced head coach, a guy who's kind of been there, he's kind of done that. But Brian Flores went through 3 offensive coordinators in 3 years. And I think the Giants looking the way they have on offense. I mean, they were an embarrassment at the end of last year. I know they didn't have Daniel Jones. I know some guys were out. They couldn't move the ball. They couldn't put up double-digit points in a game, for goodness sakes. So I do believe that played a major role. Daboll, his ability to build the staff, being able to work with Joe Schoen, and I'm sure that ownership loved the Brian Flores story. I know Brian Flores is a terrific interviewer, so I'm sure that he went in there and wowed a lot of people within the Giants. Not the least bit surprised hearing that coming out of Thursday, but the GM gets who he wants. They get an offensive mind, and I think it's a great place for the Giants to be in now with both of these guys on the exact same timetable.
The candidacy of Brian Flores was always interesting to me. We knew that Joe Schoen's guy was Brian Daboll. Absolutely everybody said that. We also knew that John Mara liked Brian Flores. I don't know if he liked him more than others, but he reached out to him before the GM was in place. He wanted to make sure he knew he was going to be a candidate. But there was almost no way, I don't think, JJ, that they could have sold Brian Flores after all their talk of alignment and collaboration and peace on earth in our organization and everything else after what happened in Miami. It's just the reports of, his rift with the GM, Chris Greer, his rift with Tua, the obviously carousel of assistant coaches. That would have been the topic of the entire first press conference. And we all would have been on guard for the first sign of friction. That's not a way to start a new regime when you're looking at everybody to hold hands and sing Kumbaya.
I totally get that, Ralph. And offensive side of the ball, my number one question would have been for Brian Flores. Okay, great. You can lead, your team gets better year after year, but who's your offensive coordinator? Because you've gone through 3 in 3 years. So who are we getting? What exactly is going to be the plan that's necessarily in place? Now with Brian Daboll, you know he's calling the shots offensively, whether Ken Dorsey follows or not. And if I were Ken Dorsey, for what it's worth, I would stay in Buffalo because I get to work with that dude, Josh Allen, again. This time next year, I might be the guy that's maybe getting himself a head coaching job. So if I'm Ken Dorsey, I don't want to give him free advice. I would stay right where I'm at. Let Allen go throw for 4,500 yards and 35 touchdowns, and you'll probably be a head coach next year. But I think defensive coordinator, whether it's Patrick Graham coming back or it's a guy like Martindale, who is highly respected around the league, I think the Giants believe they're going to be able to build a top-flight, top-notch staff with all of Brian Daboll's connections throughout a lot of different places in the league, not just Buffalo, but New England. And, you know, he spent time in Kansas City. He spent a year in Miami. He worked under Nick Saban. So it's a wide range of being able to build a staff. I think that's a big leg up for him, and I think it's a big key moving forward for the Giants.
There are some real interesting names out there for defensive coordinator. I know that Patrick Graham is interested in staying around if he doesn't land another job elsewhere. Wink Martindale, you mentioned. Vic Fangio is out there. So there's certainly an all-star roster of candidates. On offense, I'm going to assume that Brian Daboll is going to call the plays for now. Danny, when you look at the task of what he's taking over, we know the offensive line is terrible, but there are some weapons. Let's assume there's help of Daniel Jones and Kenny Golladay and Kadarius Toney. Can just the presence of Brian Daboll and the scheme that he brings immediately bring this offense not just to adequacy? I know there's 7 levels below that right now, but to actual competitiveness and respectability?
Ralph, I think I'm having some issues. I think I heard you say, assume Daniel Jones, Kenny Golladay, Saquon, and Kadarius Toney are all healthy. Is there something going wrong?
No, I heard that. Okay. I know I'm taking a gigantic leap right now. Okay. That.
Just want to make sure. Yeah. No, I think that the short answer, what can you expect with Brian Daboll, right? I think the short answer is there's no scheme. This isn't like we're bringing X offense. Brian Daboll's open-minded. I think Robert Mays, shout out Robert Mays, former Ringer colleague of mine, wrote a great piece for The Athletic where there was this wonderful quote in there from, I think, Deion Dawkins, who's a tackle for the Bills, who said, Brian Daboll doesn't paint with red or green. He uses the whole color palette. That's something you want in an offensive coordinator. Number 2, we used the word collaboration earlier. That's a word that's very easy to throw. I don't care what your job is. I don't care what workplace you're in. It's very easy to throw that around. It's another to do it. I think what's interesting about Brian Daboll is he's had a failed life. Right now we're singing his praises. He's been offensive coordinator 4 times. Well, the Bills one's the only one that's gone right. He's been fired and amid very bad performances the first 3. But what's that has given him is he's been a failed Belichick assistant. He has failed, come back, had a second life, and discovered, as every Belichick assistant has to find out, how to blend what I learned with who I am, because I'm not Bill Belichick. Brian Daboll's done that. There's some wonderful things I've heard about basically him 10 years ago would not have taken a quarterback's input on what to run. Now Brian Daboll goes and asks his players what to put in, and they do it. He calls an offensive lineman, Deion Dawkins, hey, do you think you can catch a touchdown? And they throw their left tackle a touchdown. Like, he's seeking input from players. That sounds like common sense. You would be surprised how many guys don't do that. He's analytically minded. The Bills throw on first down, which these days is like stealing yardage. He's going to use the whole playbook. He's going to ask the players what they think. I don't know if he's going to be committed to Daniel Jones, but I think he's going to be committed to doing what works in common sense, which this team could use.
One note on Daboll, though. Play caller in 2011 for the Dolphins. That was the best Miami Dolphins offense I think I've seen in a decade. With Matt Moore in a lockout year, Reggie Bush over 1,000 yards, Brandon Marshall went for 1,300 yards. And the only reason he ended up getting let go, Heifetz, is because they hired the wizard, Joe Philbin, who had all his guys that he wanted to bring on the next staff. I always liked Brian Daboll's play calls because I was like, if you could make that cast of characters competent in Miami, I think you got a future in this league.
Yeah, I've heard some people knock him for the fact that he was, an offensive coordinator for a year at a time in a bunch of places and, not very successful. But there were circumstances in there when you really look at it. And for the most part, he had some pretty terrible quarterbacks before he got to Josh Allen. And, one thing we should always remember is no coach is going to succeed if you don't have the players. If the Giants don't fix that offensive line, no amount of magic is going to fix Daniel Jones if he's lying on his back. So, to me, Joe Shane is still the whole key to this thing. He's got to get Brian Daboll the players. Otherwise, we're just going to be back here in a couple of years.
And Daboll's subtle expertise is actually pass protection. I think that that's a really interesting, like he's actually really good at it. That's a nerdy way to look at it. I would also say, I don't mean to be a sap, but like failure is good. Like realistically, there's a reason some of these Belichick assistants don't go anywhere else. It's because the team is just this machine and it works and they're not necessarily learning. Failure is where you learn. I like the fact that Daboll has failed a few times and then achieved this incredible heights with the Josh Allen, who no one really had confidence, not nobody, but a lot of people felt would be.
I didn't have confidence in him. I'll be the first to admit that. Yeah. Coming out of Wyoming, I hear concerns about accuracy. I wasn't exactly banging the table for the Giants and the Jets to take Josh Allen. Listen, now hindsight's 2020. If you were redoing the 2018 NFL draft, it's not even close. He'd be the number one pick. We wouldn't be thinking twice. He's an absolute stud. But yeah, like I think Allen deserves a lot of the credit for what he's done with his career. But you got to give some of that credit to Brian Daboll. Like if you don't, you're not paying attention.
Now, look, we'll get one last question for you guys before we go. We're all excited about this. There's a lot of good things that could happen where, Giants fans look at 4-13, they're looking to a brighter future and thinking, okay, we're starting to turn around now. I'm sure we thought that 2 years ago with Joe Judge. I'm sure we thought that 2 years before that with Pat Shurmur, maybe 2 years before that with Ben McAdoo, who's supposed to be an offensive wizard. He obviously was great his first year as a head coach. Every time there's a new coach, everybody's excited. For the Giants, the pattern is the first sign of trouble, they bail. As soon as it looks like things are going wrong, every 2 years, John Mara's firing a coach. How worried are you guys that Daboll's just not going to get a chance? Because that's my biggest concern. To me, you've got to allow him to fail. If this year he looks at Daniel Jones and thinks, my goodness, he stinks, it's going to take another couple of years to find another quarterback. You may need to give him 3-4 years to get this program going. I'm concerned that as soon as things go wrong, John Mara is going to fire him again. JJ, I'll start with you. Do you think the Giants are going to be patient this time around?
Well, I think they are, Ralph, because you have the GM and the head coach in many ways tied at the hip. You think about 2 years ago, they fired Pat Shurmur, and yet they kept Dave Gettleman around. It was like this disjointed way of doing business. So now we know, Joe Schoen, it's going to take him time to get the salary cap to where it needs to be. Then you got to answer the Daniel Jones question. You might be drafting a quarterback in 2 years, which obviously is going to start the whole process all over again. And look, I know New York is a very antsy town. Ralph, Danny, you guys know this. The Giant fan base is very proud. They are disgusted with what they've seen over the last 8 or 9 years. But I think if the process, and I know it's a cliche word and it gets way too much attention, but if you see the process of the Giants within their front office, with the way they look, with the way they're giving effort, executing, playing 21st century football. I know, what a concept. Playing the modern day NFL. If you see that next year and you see a step forward the following year with a rookie quarterback, then I don't think you're going to have anything to worry about. That's the key, just seeing that sort of progression.
Danny, you think we'll be back here in 2 years, or do you think he's going to get the time and resources he needs?
No chance that we're back here in 2 years, for the simple reason that Gettleman's left big enough a mess that year one is a wash, and two, not being Dave Gettleman will buy them 2 years on their own, and then their own merits will buy them, more than that. So I have no concern, and I think that whether you think the Giants are a Ferrari or a clown car, I think today they drove into a gold mine.
Well, I hope you're right, because quite honestly, I'm really tired of covering coaching searches and GM searches. I would like to have an actual off
Way
season.
too much bad football around Vacchiano. Let's be honest.
You can start playing golf in January. It's like,
yeah, exactly. Maybe we'll get to go to a playoff game sometime in the next couple of years. So at least this is the day to dream. You got a new head coach, new general manager. It's all positive until opening week in September, and they lose, and then everybody will be off the bandwagon. But we got a while to go for that. For now, we'll leave it there. Go to SNYTV.tv, everybody, for full coverage of the Brian Daboll hiring. Watch Sports Night later on SNY as well. We got you fully covered everywhere. For Danny Heifetz and John Jastrzemski, I'm Ralph Vacchiano. Thanks for watching, everybody.